Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be sharing with you how to cut a pointy Victorian corset with a Queen Anne neckline. So if this is something you like, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up. So let's dive right into today's video. So first, here is my pattern paper and I'm going to go ahead to mark out all my basic measurements. So I'm going to go ahead to mark my shoulder to bust, which is 9 inches, shoulder to under bust, which is 12, shoulder to waistline, which is 17 inches, and my top length is 22. That is 5 inches away from my waistline. So for this particular pattern, I'm making use of a bust dart. So to get your bust dart is the difference between your front measurement and your back measurement. You notice at the back of your dress there's no bust, and at the front you have a bust. So if you measure from your front measurement to your waistline, you notice that there's a slight difference from your shoulder to the waist measurement at the back. So the difference for mine is 1.5 inches. So I'll go ahead to use that for my bust dart in this pattern, and I'll go ahead to outline the marks that I have made. So I'll just go ahead to place my ruler and rule out those lines, and after that I'll go ahead to label it. So the next step is to mark your shoulder divided by 2 plus ½ inch, and you're going to come down by 1 inch to create your shoulder slope. And after you're done doing that, you're going to find your chest line or your armhole line. Your chest line or armhole line is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So mine is 7, and I'll go ahead to mark what I have on the shoulder at that point, and then I'll connect. This is just to have a straight line. So after I'm done doing that, I'm going to go ahead to measure what I have from that chest line to the bust, and I'm going to mark that to create a straight line at that point, which will be serving as my chest line point. Now I'll divide the armhole into 2 mark, and I will come in by ½ inch, and from this point I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4, which will be serving as a guide to draw out my armhole. I'll connect from my bust circumference divided by 4 to the armhole and to the upper part of the shoulder. I'll just go ahead and I'll use the marker to outline the shoulder and the armhole area of my pattern. So after I'm done doing this, I'm going to go ahead to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, or my bust pan divided by 2. So my nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. So I'll go ahead and mark this all the way to the top length of my pattern, and I'm going to place my rule, connect, and draw a straight line all the way down. So now you want to go ahead to decide where you want your neckline to start, or like a guide to draw out your dart on top. So I'll mark 1.5 inches and draw a fence line, extend my nipple to nipple line, and connect. So I'll be marking 1 inch dart on both sides of my under bust this way, and I'm going to repeat the same at the waistline, and I'm going to connect it starting from the under bust. But before then, I'll mark 4 inches away from my waistline, go ahead to connect this, and also connect the other side of my pattern and extend my dart all the way to the lower part. So after I'm done doing this, I'm going to place my curved rule, connect from the bust down to the under bust, and I'll also repeat this at the other side, connect this. So this is what I have right now, and at the upper part I'll be marking a dart intake of 0.75. so I don't want that part of my dart to be too curvy like when I'm joining it, so that's why I'm using 0.75. So you can also use your normal dart intake of 1 inch or 1.5 inches, especially if you're on the bigger side. So now I'll go ahead to impute the measurement before we go ahead to alter the pattern. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Then I'll go ahead to measure this dart intake, and I will replace it and add my sewing allowance. So at the under bust, I'll mark the under bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and add my sewing allowance. So for the waistline, I want to take out 2 inches from my waistline. So my waist circumference is 28. Taking out 2 inches, I have 26. 26 divided by 4, I have 6.5. I'll mark that, measure the dart intake, and add my sewing allowance. So for this pattern, you can go ahead and use 1.5 inches or 2 inches for your sewing allowance. I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4, and I'll add my sewing allowance. So while I was drafting, I used half inch because I'm not actually going to make this pattern. But if you're sewing it, go ahead to mark your bust circumference divided by 4 and add your sewing allowance. I'll go ahead and connect my pattern all the way down, and after I'm done connecting, this is what I have. So now I'll go ahead and I'll measure my basic neckline of 3 inches by 3 inches. This will be serving as a guide when I'm cutting out the pointy edge of the Victorian corset. So now I'm going to come down by half inch or 0.75 from my basic neckline, and I will be connecting this all the way down to the lower part of my pattern this way. And after I'm done connecting and I'm okay with what I have, I'll just go ahead to use my marker to outline it. After you're done doing that, you're just going to go ahead to extend your dart. That is the dart you have at the upper part. That same 0.75 you marked or 1 inch, go ahead to extend it and blend in your dart very well. So after I'm done, this is what I have at this upper part of my pattern. After my neckline, I marked half inch from my basic neckline. At the lower part, I marked 2.5 inches so that I'll be using half inch to attach my sleeve, and I'll have 2 inches remaining at the lower part. But at the upper part, I went ahead to extend it a little more out from that half inch. And I went ahead also to mark a style line on this pattern, since I've already snatched my waist, and marking another dart intake might be confusing, so I marked a style line. So now my bust dart is 1.5 inches, and I'll go ahead to connect it all the way to my bust. So after connecting, this is what I have. I explained at the beginning of the video how I got my bust dart. So I'll just go ahead and connect my pattern this way and give it a little curve at this part at the middle, and I'll be cutting out the rest of my pattern. So at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button. So I went ahead to mark 0.25 inches on that part of my yoke, just to get rid of any bulginess or any excess I might have on the yoke. So I blended in my dart and I pinned it down. You can use your tape to hold it down, and I cut it out. So this is what I have after cutting out, and we'll be moving over to the back pattern. So just the same way I marked my measurements in front, that is what I'll be marking at the back. The only difference now is that for my waistline at the back, it will be 15.5 instead of 17 inches. Remember, we took a bust dart of 1.5 inches from our pattern on top, so that's why our waistline will be 15.5 at the back pattern. So coming over to the length of the back pattern, also we'll be making use of 20.5 inch for the length instead of 22 inches, because we took 1.5 inch from the bust dart in front. So 22 minus 1.5, you'll be having 20 inches. I don't know if this is too confusing, but if you have any question, please leave at the comment section. So I went ahead to mark the chest line just like I did at the front pattern, and I'll be marking the rest of the upper part of my pattern. So I'll be using the exact way I marked out my pattern for the front to mark out the neckline of this pattern. So next, I will go ahead to mark the neckline of 3 inches at the back, mark that half inch we have after the neckline, and I'll mark 2 inches at the 2.5 inches at the lower part, and after that I'll just go ahead to connect my pattern. So after this, I'll be labeling this as the yoke pattern of my dress, and I'll mark 0.25 at the neckline and blend it out. This is to take out any excess at the yoke part of my pattern. Now I'll be marking my nipple to nipple divided by 2. My nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. Go ahead to connect this all the way up, and I'll connect to the lower part of this pattern. Now I'll be marking 1/2 inch that intake at both sides, and I will connect all the way up and connect to the other side, and I'm going to connect to the lower part of my pattern this way. After I'm done doing that, I'm just going to go ahead to mark the bust circumference divided by 4. Then go ahead to add your sewing allowance. I'll mark the same waistline I used for the front, measure the dart intake, replace and add my sewing allowance. For the top length, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4 and add the sewing allowance. And I will just go ahead to connect this all the way to my waistline and to my top length. So I'll go ahead and use my marker to label this all the way out, and I'll come down by 1/2 inch from my chest line and I'll connect it all the way up. This is to make sure that this part of the lacing bar does not pop up when you're wearing the dress, and I'll outline this. Now I'll be marking the lacing bar area of my pattern. So for the lacing bar area, I'll be using 2 inches for the lacing bar, and this is not a standard. You can use more than that to mark this out. I'll connect to the lower part of my top length, and after I'm done, I'll just make a dot to indicate that that is the lacing bar area of my pattern. And with this, I'll just go ahead and draw out the back pattern of this blouse, and I'll just cut this out. You can go ahead to add a style line to this pattern for your back pattern, or you can just go ahead to leave it. I'll go ahead to cut the rest of my pattern, and with this, we have come to the end of today's tutorial. Please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and join us in our next video.